Have you ever wondered if your penis is actually within the normal range? Or if silent insecurities have been shaping your confidence for years without you even noticing? Most men over 50 think size is something fixed, judged, or compared, yet what they rarely consider is how deeply these thoughts affect their erection, their sex life, and even the way they see themselves as men. And here is the surprising truth: insecurity about penis size is far more common than performance issues themselves. I'm Dr. Emily Collins, urologist and men's health specialist, and today we're breaking down what the newest scientific research really says about penis size, erections, and the standards that men keep chasing even though science has already proven them unnecessary. Let's start with a reality most men never hear clearly. You might look at your penis in the mirror or compare yourself to unrealistic images online and assume something is wrong with you. But the human penis changes dramatically based on temperature, arousal, blood flow, stress levels, and even the time of day. What you see is not a fixed measurement. More importantly, what you think you see often has nothing to do with what women actually care about. That disconnect between perception and reality is at the root of so much quiet suffering in men over 50 and 60. You may believe your size determines your value in bed, but biology, psychology, and real data tell a very different story. And here's where things become even more interesting. Many men assume that normal must be bigger than what they have, because their mind was shaped by myths, exaggerations, and decades of silent comparison. But the newest research shows most men fall into a tight, predictable, scientifically consistent range, and the vast majority underestimate themselves. What you see as a limitation is often just a distorted expectation created by culture, not medicine. And when that expectation becomes anxiety, it affects erection quality, blood flow, and performance far more than size ever could. That's why understanding the truth is not just informative, it's liberating. Before we go deeper into the numbers and what science actually defines as normal, let me ask you something. Have you ever avoided intimacy because you weren't sure if your size was enough? Have you ever felt distracted during sex, worried about how you compare? If so, you're not alone, and what you're about to discover may shift your entire perspective. And if this conversation is already opening your eyes, take a moment to drop a comment sharing your experience, leave a like to support this message, and check if you're subscribed so you don't miss what comes next. Because the real truth about penis size is far more reassuring than the myths you've been carrying, and understanding it is the first step toward reclaiming confidence and restoring the sexual vitality you deserve as we move into the next part, where the real science finally speaks for itself. When we strip away cultural myths and look purely at scientific evidence, penis size becomes far less mysterious and far more predictable than most men imagine. The newest research, including large-scale meta-analyses involving thousands of measurements collected under controlled conditions, has revealed something most men are never told directly: the male body operates within a stable biological pattern. Variation exists, yes, but far less than the mind tends to assume. What feels like a personal flaw is almost always just a normal point inside a very consistent physiological spectrum. One of the biggest misconceptions is believing that flaccid size indicates erect size. In reality, the flaccid penis is extremely reactive. Temperature, stress, fatigue, hydration, and even simple anxiety can shrink it dramatically, while warmth and relaxation can make it appear noticeably larger. For some men, the difference between flaccid and erect length is small; for others, the transformation is dramatic. Researchers call this the grower versus shower effect, and both patterns are equally normal. Flaccid size tells you almost nothing about your true dimensions during sex, yet many men judge themselves entirely based on that moment in the mirror. The updated scientific data reveal another powerful truth. The average erect length across the most reliable studies consistently falls around the middle of a narrow range, and the average girth clusters even more tightly. Extreme sizes, the ones shown in media, adult content, or exaggerated stories, represent a tiny minority of the population. But because the mind tends to remember outliers and ignore averages, many men internalize a distorted idea of what most men look like. That distorted expectation quietly fuels insecurity, and insecurity alone can influence erection firmness, stamina, and sexual confidence. There is also something else the new data highlight clearly: genetics do play a role, but not in the way many men think. Height, hand size, foot size, and other external traits have no consistent correlation with penis size. This means the old jokes and comparisons are biologically meaningless. What truly determines size is a complex interaction of prenatal hormone exposure, tissue responsiveness, and individual vascular characteristics, factors that no man consciously controls. In other words, your penis is not a reflection of your masculinity, your attractiveness, or your worth. It is simply a normal biological variation like eye color or bone structure. Understanding these facts does something powerful. It removes the imaginary pressure to measure up to unrealistic standards and replaces it with solid evidence about what your body really represents. And once the pressure surrounding size begins to fade, something else becomes possible: a deeper focus on what truly shapes sexual satisfaction, intimacy, and erection quality, elements that have far more impact on your real experience than a single number ever could. As we continue, the picture becomes even clearer when we examine what women actually report wanting, not in public conversations shaped by bravado, but in confidential research settings where honesty finally replaces expectation. When researchers finally asked women what they truly prefer, not in public surveys where social pressure shapes the answers, but in private, anonymous studies where honesty becomes easier, the results were far more reassuring than most men expect. Across multiple psychological and behavioral studies, women consistently ranked comfort, emotional connection, confidence, and communication far above size. In fact, size itself rarely appeared in the top traits associated with sexual satisfaction. What mattered most was how present, attentive, and emotionally engaged a man was, not the number on a ruler. One of the most surprising findings comes from studies using 3D models, where women could choose size without judgment or influence. Even when given complete freedom, the preference centered firmly around average dimensions. What they cared about far more was how easily intimacy flowed, how comfortable penetration felt, and whether their partner created a space of trust rather than performance anxiety. Many women even emphasized that extremes, particularly excessive girth, could cause discomfort, reduce pleasure, and make sex feel less enjoyable rather than more intense. There is another aspect that men rarely hear clearly. Women interpret attraction differently from men. While men may focus visually or physically, women emphasize emotional context, the tone of voice, confidence, warmth, humor, physical presence, and how safe or valued they feel. Those experiences shape desire far more deeply than the physical size of a penis ever could. In interviews, women repeatedly express that connection and confidence amplify pleasure, while insecurity or worry, especially in a partner, reduces it dramatically. Even the concept of ideal size is more nuanced than most imagine. For women who report experiencing vaginal orgasms more easily, a slightly above average length may feel preferable, but even in those cases, the preference stays within the normal biological range, not anywhere near the exaggerated extremes men often fear they must match. And for the majority of women who experience orgasm primarily through clitoral stimulation, size becomes nearly irrelevant for sexual satisfaction. In these cases, what matters most is technique, rhythm, emotional presence, and the man's ability to read and respond to his partner. When women were asked what negatively affects their satisfaction, size almost never appeared on the list. Instead, the most common complaints were lack of foreplay, poor communication, rushing through intimacy, or a partner who seemed anxious, distracted, or overly focused on performance. Ironically, the insecurity men carry about size often creates the very problems that undermine intimacy. A worried mind shifts attention away from pleasure, reduces erection firmness, and breaks emotional connection. Meanwhile, a confident, engaged man who feels good in his own body naturally creates an environment where both partners experience more pleasure. What the newest research makes undeniably clear is that women value how a man shows up, emotionally, physically, and relationally, far more than they value the size he brings. And once this truth sinks in, it becomes easier to understand why. Sexual fulfillment depends far more on presence, trust, and communication than on any measurement. As we move forward, this perspective becomes even more important when we explore how male self-esteem is shaped by long-standing myths, and how those beliefs silently affect erection quality, desire, and performance later in life. As men move into their 50s and 60s, something subtle but powerful begins to happen beneath the surface. The myths they absorbed throughout life, the jokes, comparisons, silent assumptions, cultural messages about penis size and masculinity, start shaping their confidence in ways they rarely talk about openly. Even men who outwardly appear secure carry private doubts, and those doubts often influence their erections, desire, and overall sexual performance far more than any physical trait ever could. The psychological weight of these myths becomes a quiet force, affecting the body just as strongly as age-related hormonal or vascular changes. What many men don't realize is that erection quality is deeply connected to emotional state. Anxiety, fear of underperforming, or worrying about size activates the body's stress response. When the brain senses threat, even a perceived one, it redirects blood flow away from the pelvis toward major muscle groups as part of the fight-or-flight mechanism. This means the very act of worrying about your penis can physically weaken your erection. In men over 50, who are already dealing with natural reductions in nitric oxide, this emotional pressure creates a compounded effect, making it harder to stay firm and present during intimacy. Self-esteem plays a central role in this process. A man who feels inadequate tends to disconnect from his own body. He becomes hyper-focused on performance, monitoring himself instead of experiencing pleasure. That internal surveillance disrupts arousal and disrupts the natural sequence of stimulation that leads to a full, healthy erection. Over time, this cycle can condition the brain to associate sex with stress rather than anticipation, and once that mental pattern forms, the body responds accordingly. What started as a simple insecurity becomes a physical reality, even though the body itself is still capable of strong performance. Low confidence also affects libido. Desire is not purely hormonal, it is strongly influenced by how a man feels about himself. When he worries about size, appearance, or performance, his mind begins to suppress sexual impulses to avoid potential embarrassment. Many men mistake this emotional shutdown for low testosterone, but in reality, it's often psychological self-protection. The body isn't losing interest in sex, the mind is trying to avoid failure. This internal conflict becomes especially common in midlife, when physical changes make men more aware of their vulnerability. The relationship between confidence and sexual function goes even deeper. Studies show that men who feel good about their bodies, regardless of their actual measurements, experience stronger erections, more consistent arousal, and greater satisfaction in intimacy. Confidence acts as a biological amplifier, allowing the nervous system, hormones, and vascular responses to work together rather than against each other. When a man believes he is enough, his body responds as if he is. When he doubts himself, the biological systems that support erection become hesitant, inconsistent, or easily disrupted. Understanding this connection is essential. Not just emotionally but physically. The body and mind are not separate systems when it comes to sexual health, they influence each other constantly. And once a man recognizes how much anxiety and old myths have been shaping his experience, he can begin to reclaim control in ways that have nothing to do with size and everything to do with presence, confidence, and internal stability. This shift becomes even more meaningful when we look at the real biological factors that determine a strong, lasting erection, factors that have nothing to do with size and everything to do with circulation, hormones, and the health of the vascular system. When we move away from myths and look strictly at the biology of a strong erection, something becomes immediately clear: penis size has absolutely no role in determining how firm, stable, or reliable an erection will be. What truly controls performance is a complex interaction between circulation, hormones, nerve signaling, and psychological state. These systems work together like a precise internal engine, and when even one of them falters, erection quality declines long before size becomes part of the conversation. For men in their 50s and 60s, understanding this difference is essential because the path to better performance has everything to do with vascular health and almost nothing to do with anatomy. The foundation of every erection is blood flow. To become firm, the penile arteries must dilate, nitric oxide levels must rise, and the smooth muscle within the corpora cavernosa must relax, allowing blood to fill and be trapped inside the erectile chambers. This process depends heavily on the health of the endothelium, the thin lining inside blood vessels. As men age, especially after 50, the endothelium becomes less responsive, making it harder for nitric oxide to trigger the full dilation needed for a strong erection. Poor diet, stress, lack of sleep, and conditions like high blood pressure or diabetes only worsen this decline. But none of these factors change size, they change function. Hormones play a role too, but not in the way many assume. Testosterone affects desire, motivation, mood, and overall vitality, but it does not increase size. What it does influence is how quickly the brain responds to arousal signals and how easily the body shifts into an intimate state. Low testosterone can make arousal slower or less spontaneous, yet even men with modest levels can achieve strong erections when blood flow and nitric oxide pathways are healthy. The body is far more flexible than most realize, and performance relies heavily on daily habits, not predetermined physical traits. Nerve function is another critical factor. Erection begins in the brain, travels down the spinal cord, and activates a series of signals that cause the vascular system to expand. Stress, anxiety, and chronic tension interfere with these signals, reducing the strength of the erection before blood flow even enters the equation. This is why confidence, relaxation, and emotional presence have such a profound impact. When the nervous system stays calm and responsive, erection quality improves naturally. When the mind is tense, worried, or self-critical, especially about size, those same pathways weaken. Circulation, hormones, and nerve function also respond strongly to lifestyle. Regular movement increases endothelial flexibility. Good sleep regulates testosterone. Hydration keeps blood volume stable. Balanced nutrition supports vascular health, and controlled stress reduces cortisol, which otherwise constricts blood vessels. These simple daily practices have more influence on erection quality than any external feature. That is why two men with completely different sizes can experience the same strength of erections, or the same difficulties, depending on the state of their internal systems. Once these factors become clear, a powerful realization follows: performance is built, not given. It is shaped by circulation, habits, mindset, and hormonal balance, not by size. And once a man understands the mechanics behind his erections, he gains a level of control and confidence that no measurement can offer. This understanding sets the stage for a deeper exploration into the habits, techniques, and lifestyle adjustments that elevate confidence and improve sexual performance at any age, especially for men looking to reclaim vitality and presence in their intimate lives. As men begin to understand that performance is shaped by biology, mindset, and daily habits rather than size, a new sense of control starts to emerge. Confidence stops being an abstract idea and becomes something practical, something that can be strengthened through simple and consistent actions. What the newest research consistently shows is that certain habits have a direct impact on erection strength, stamina, sensitivity, and overall sexual presence, even for men well into their 50s and 60s. These are habits that recalibrate the body from the inside out, restoring vitality in ways many men thought were no longer possible. One of the most powerful habits is improving circulation through movement. You don't need extreme workouts, even moderate, consistent activity increases nitric oxide production, strengthens vascular pathways, and enhances blood flow to the pelvic region. Men who walk regularly, practice light strength training, or engage in activities that elevate heart rate for just a few minutes each day show a noticeable improvement in erection quality. The penis is a vascular organ, and like any vascular system, it thrives on consistent stimulation. The more you move, the more responsive your erections become. Another key habit is managing stress, which most men underestimate. Chronic stress keeps cortisol levels high, tightening blood vessels and disrupting arousal signals. Stress also pushes the mind into a defensive state that interrupts sexual desire. Techniques like controlled breathing, short breaks throughout the day, and even intentional moments of relaxation help shift the body into a more receptive state. When the nervous system feels safe, the body allows arousal to develop naturally. This explains why men who carry tension, anxiety, or performance worries often struggle, even when their physical health is otherwise strong. Nutrition also plays a critical role. Foods rich in antioxidants, healthy fats, and natural nitric oxide boosters support blood flow and hormone balance. Dark leafy greens, berries, olive oil, nuts, and sources of omega-3 create an internal environment where the vascular system works efficiently. This doesn't replace medical treatment when needed, but it dramatically enhances how the body responds to arousal. Hydration is equally important. Even mild dehydration thickens the blood and reduces circulation to the extremities, including the penis. Small adjustments in daily diet accumulate into significant improvements over time. Sleep is another underestimated factor. During deep sleep, testosterone production increases, cortisol drops, and the nervous system resets. Men who consistently get restorative sleep report higher libido, stronger erections, and clearer mental focus. Poor or irregular sleep disrupts these cycles, leading to reduced sensitivity and inconsistent performance. Many men assume their issues are hormonal when, in reality, their bodies are simply exhausted and unable to support full arousal. Finally, emotional presence and body confidence reinforce these physical habits. When a man feels grounded in his own body, he becomes more responsive, more engaged, and more attuned to sensations. This presence boosts sensitivity, pleasure, and erection quality. Confidence is not about pretending to be something else, it is about reconnecting with what your body can do when given the right environment. And once a man begins strengthening these habits, he often discovers that performance improves naturally, regardless of size or previous insecurities. All these elements together create a foundation for sexual vitality that continues to grow with age. They prepare the body and mind to experience intimacy with greater strength and ease, setting the stage for a final realization that reshapes how men view themselves and their own sexual potential as they step into the closing insights of this journey. When men finally understand how normal they truly are, something inside them begins to settle. The pressure to measure, compare, or silently doubt themselves gradually fades, replaced by a deeper awareness of what actually defines a satisfying and confident sex life. The newest research makes one point clearer than ever before: most men fall comfortably within the normal anatomical range, and the overwhelming majority of worries they carry come not from their bodies, but from years of distorted expectations. When those expectations dissolve, confidence returns in ways that affect far more than performance. It changes presence, energy, desire, and the ability to enjoy intimacy without monitoring every sensation. For many men, especially in their 50s and 60s, this realization becomes transformative. They discover that pleasure depends far more on how connected they feel than on how they compare. They notice that their erections improve when their mind is calmer. They recognize that their partner responds more intensely when they show confidence rather than pressure. By understanding that size was never the deciding factor, they free themselves from one of the most persistent barriers to sexual freedom. And in that freedom, they start to experience sex with a renewed sense of curiosity, purpose, and vitality. A strong sexual life at this stage of life is not defined by chasing youth, but by embracing the body you have with clarity and intention. It comes from knowing how your system works, how your emotions influence arousal, and how simple habits elevate performance far more reliably than self-criticism. It comes from recognizing that the body is adaptable, responsive, and capable of improvements at any age. Most importantly, it comes from shifting the internal narrative, from fear to understanding, from comparison to connection, from pressure to presence. And once that shift happens, men often realize something they never expected: their partners were never focusing on size the way they imagined. Women value confidence, communication, gentleness, passion, and emotional availability far beyond any measurement. When a man shows up with clarity and self-assurance, intimacy becomes richer, deeper, and far more satisfying for both sides. By letting go of the myths, he steps into a version of himself that feels stronger, more grounded, and more aligned with what real sexual fulfillment requires. If you reached this point, it already shows how committed you are to understanding your body and reclaiming your confidence. And if this message resonated with you, consider subscribing so you can keep receiving information that strengthens your health, your sexual vitality, and your understanding of yourself as a man. Leave a comment saying something like, "This message was for me, so I know you stayed with me until the end," and give a like if this content helped you see things from a new perspective. And when you're ready, there's another video waiting right here that continues this journey and deepens everything we explored today. Just click and keep going at your own pace, carrying this new clarity with you.